Hello. So, welcome to the beach under the midday sun. I was trying to take some photos of the waves, of the rising tide, of some birds on the rocks over there that flew away. Tends to happen. And this is today's subject. So, we'll be talking about seascape photography, photography by the sea more generally, the challenges, the good sides too, my experience at least. We'll be looking at some of my shots while we discuss. I hope you enjoy it. So let's talk about settings. That's usually the easier part. So right now on manual, I'm only ever on manual if I really care about the shutter speed for Seascape. So that might mean freezing the movement from the wind, freezing my dog running around, the birds that are back on those rocks. More often than not, it's about freezing the movement of the water. So I want to catch the waves at a certain point. When it's not the middle of the day with the sun up high and it's morning or evening, I can play around with slower shutter speed, right? So you can allow the water to flow. You can be creative with camera movements, and that's much easier when it's darker. But that's the creative side. So more often than not, for landscape, for seascape, I'm on my user one. So the user one mode that I have on my Nikon is an aperture priority, which I modified a little bit. So I have a minimum shutter speed, I have a maximum ISO, those are my safety nets. The default is f8, that's a good starting point. And I have exposure compensation, which I almost always use. But that's faster for me to work like that, to have my aperture at f8 as the starting point, to be able to just adjust the exposure compensation if I disagree with the camera. And I know that more often than not, this will work, right? So for the seascape, for the landscape, I'm at the right distance with the subject, with the scene. And I have a focal length that works. So I'm able to turn on the camera and start shooting and not care about the settings that much. At least I can start from there. And the cold months of the year where it's very difficult with huge gloves to not freeze to death and to be able to change some settings. When it's raining, when it's windy, when it's snowing, when I'm walking with my dog or exploring somewhere with someone and I don't have a lot of time to change the settings, I'll just start with that. I'll dial in my user one and I'm ready for landscape and seascapes for about 80% of my shots. Now for the most important part of my photography, and probably everybody's photography, and what is usually the most challenging part, is the subject. So you want to find a subject that makes the photo interesting, because when you're there in person, usually the seascape is incredible. Always. You have the waves that you hear, the water that you feel, you smell the sea. In the moment, everything's extraordinary, but it's very difficult to translate that into a single static photo that represents all of that experience of being there by the sea. And the result can be a bit boring. So usually I'll try to find something that moves. It's not necessarily something that has to do with shutter speed, but it's something that makes the photo different. For example, a dog, birds. It could be a boat. It could be passing clouds. It could be people on the beach. So you want to find something that makes the scene interesting, that adds an unusual subject or an interesting, static, singular object. If you're a bit familiar with my photos, I like icebergs and large blocks of ice quite a lot as a subject. You can find other types of identifiable singular objects, such as a large rock or a tree leaning towards the horizon. It could be clouds or a distant boat that you can barely make out. Anything that can attract the viewer's eyes as part of your scene. You might want to also play around with colors, large shapes, reflections. You might want to explore symmetry. Many different subjects make for a good photo. But in any case, you have to find a way to also present it in a way that's interesting for this singular static object, or for this interesting, colorful, geometrical subject that you found. It needs to be translated properly, and for that, I mean to maybe get very low at eye level or lower to include some foreground elements to find a way to frame the image in an interesting way. And it helps to tell the story a bit better. Another important part of my seascape photography, which has a huge impact, is the time of day. Right, so you can decide to shoot in the morning or in the evening. That could influence whether or not your subject by the sea is backlit or not. You might want to do more of a documentary style of photography, of simple objects in the day-to-day, where you don't necessarily want epic lights and colors to influence the scene all that much, because what I find is that often sunsets, golden hours, blue hours will kind of steal the show. It's very difficult to make abstraction of that and just focus on a singular object in the center of a scene where you have all of those insane clouds and colors happening in the background. So this is a storytelling choice. It's an aesthetic choice, but it's also a storytelling choice. It will have an influence on how your photo is perceived, understood, how it comes across, how your story is appreciated even. Some photographers can, for example, get sick of that, of really impressive golden hour colors, because it becomes a bit easy, right? It could become a bit too impressive, whereas more simple seaside photography is perhaps more challenging if it's the middle of the day, but also allows you to focus on other things than impressive backgrounds, for example. So I've had my share of challenges with seascape photography, right? We already mentioned finding good subjects, shooting in harsh light. You're always exposed to the elements. Comes rain, snow, you're always outside. The weather by the sea is unpredictable, it's always changing. And another challenge is the day-to-day similarities, right? So this scene here, this body of water, those rocks probably haven't changed or moved much in the last decades, centuries, or more. And one escape from the similarities is the changing of seasons, which is something that really fascinates me. I, for one, prefer winter to shoot seascapes, but that probably deserves its own video, winter seascape photography. In Eastern Canada, we're very lucky to have 4 very different seasons, which bring change. And perhaps eventually we'll do seasonal seascape photography videos. And all of those challenges are really only serving us to try and tell better stories of the sea every single day. We get to be outside, we get to experience this amazing activity. My dog is certainly happy to be spending all this time outside. And on that note, go take your photos.